Remember, just because you're hosting doesn't mean you get to be part of the actual dinner. Someone needs to make sure everything runs smoothly. That's your job. My brother Tyler's text made my stomach clench as I stared at my phone in the grocery store, surrounded by the ingredients I was buying for my parents' 40th anniversary dinner. A dinner I was paying for. A dinner I was cooking for. A dinner I was cleaning my house for. And apparently, a dinner I wouldn't actually be sitting down to enjoy. The fluorescent lights of Higgins Market buzzed overhead as I reread the message, the casual entitlement of it burning like acid in my chest. This wasn't new. Tyler had been delegating me to the background of family functions since we were kids, back when he would announce I'd be the one to clean up after his birthday parties without even asking me. The pattern had continued into adulthood, becoming so normal that no one, least of all me, had ever questioned it. I glanced at the shopping cart, prime rib that cost more than my weekly grocery budget, fingerling potatoes, fresh asparagus, ingredients for my mother's favorite chocolate souffle, all for a celebration where I'd be relegated to the kitchen, serving everyone else while they reminisced and laughed without me. Again. My fingers hovered over the phone, ready to type my usual response. Whatever you think is best. The words I'd been saying to my family for 32 years. Words that had turned me into the family doormat, the reliable Emma who would do whatever was needed without complaint. But something about this particular message, its casual cruelty, its absolute certainty that I would comply, made something snap inside me. I put my phone away without responding and looked down at my cart. For a moment, I considered abandoning it right there in the middle of Higgins Market, walking out and driving back to my empty house in Millfield. Then I thought about my parents. They deserved a beautiful anniversary. This wasn't about Tyler. This was about them. I pictured Mom's face if I called to cancel, the quiet disappointment she'd try to hide. I thought of Dad, who had been looking forward to having everyone in the same place for once. I couldn't do that to them. Mrs. Whitaker, my former high school English teacher, appeared at the end of the aisle with her own cart. She smiled when she saw me. "Emma Lawson, how are you, dear? I heard you're hosting a big celebration for your parents." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yes, their 40th anniversary. Such a wonderful thing you're doing." She patted my arm. "You know, I always told your mother what a thoughtful daughter she had, and so accomplished now with your research work at the college. I read about your publication in the Millfield Monitor." "You did?" I hadn't realized the local paper had mentioned it. "Of course. We're proud when our own do well." She leaned closer. "You know who else noticed? Judge Brennan's wife. She's on the Historical Society board and mentioned your name just last week." As Mrs. Whitaker moved on with a wave, something shifted inside me. People in this town, people outside my family, saw me as someone of value, someone who contributed. Why was it so hard for Tyler to see the same? I pushed the cart forward, but as I did, I made a decision. This dinner would happen, but not the way Tyler expected. For once, I would be more than just the hands that prepared the food and cleared the plates. It was time to rewrite the story of Emma Lawson in the eyes of her family. The day of the anniversary dinner arrived with unseasonably warm spring weather. I woke at dawn, my to-do list already scrolling through my mind like ticker tape. Usually the pressure would have me feeling sick with anxiety, Tyler's expectations hovering over me like a storm cloud. But today felt different. Today I was calling the shots. I prepared the house methodically, fresh flowers from the local nursery in strategic spots, candles that smelled like Mom's favorite vanilla and amber. Music selected to include songs from their wedding year. Every detail planned not to impress, but to create moments that would matter to my parents. I'd taken the day off work, a luxury I never usually allowed myself, to focus entirely on the preparations. By mid-afternoon, the prime rib was marinating, the vegetables were prepped, and the dining room was transformed. My house wasn't large, but it had a decent dining room that could accommodate the 12 people coming. My parents, my brother Tyler and his wife Melissa, my Aunt Judith and Uncle Frank, my mother's college roommate Diane and her husband, and the surprise guests, Dr. Harris Coleman and his wife Beth. When the doorbell rang at 4:30, I checked my appearance one last time in the hallway mirror. I'd chosen a deep green dress that I'd had for years but rarely worn, Tyler had once commented it was too bold for family gatherings. I'd swept my hair up and even put on the pearl earrings my grandmother had left me. Tonight, I wasn't going to fade into the background. Dr. Coleman had been my father's mentor during his early medical career, and they'd lost touch after Dad's practice moved to Berryville. I'd spent weeks tracking down the retired surgeon, now something of a legend in medical circles. The search had involved 3 hospital records departments, 2 medical journals where I'd found his articles cited, and finally a connection through my college library's alumni network. When I'd finally reached him by phone, he'd asked thoughtful questions about my father's career and life. I'd outlined the surprise dinner, and to my delight, he'd actually remembered my father with genuine fondness. Dr. Joseph Lawson, he'd said, his voice warm with memory. Brilliant diagnostician. More importantly, a doctor who listened to his patients. You don't find that combination often. As for Diane, tracking down my mother's college roommate had required some stealth. I'd borrowed Mom's alumni magazine during a visit and found Diane's name in a class notes section. The magazine mentioned she'd recently retired from her architectural firm, but was still consulting on historical preservation projects. A few LinkedIn searches later, I had an email address and soon after, an enthusiastic acceptance. What Tyler didn't know was that I'd invited Dr. Coleman myself. What Tyler also didn't know was that I'd invited anyone at all. He'd been so busy dictating how the dinner should go, right down to the seating arrangement he'd emailed me twice, that he hadn't bothered to ask about the guest list. What exactly is going on here? Tyler stood in my entryway, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper as he gestured toward the dining room, where our parents were already chatting with Aunt Judith and Uncle Frank. Who authorized you to invite Dad's old mentor? And why is Mom's college roommate here? This was supposed to be immediate family only. I smiled pleasantly, taking his coat and hanging it in the closet. Isn't it wonderful? Dr. Coleman drove 3 hours to be here. Dad nearly cried when he saw him. That's not the point, Emma. Tyler stepped closer, his expensive cologne overwhelming in the small space. You've completely changed the event. We agreed. You agreed? I corrected him, keeping my voice even. I don't recall being part of that conversation. Tyler stared at me as if I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. In a way, I had. Standing up to my older brother was not in our established script. Look, he said, switching to his boardroom voice, the one he used to close deals at his investment firm, you're creating an awkward situation. We don't have gifts for these extra people. The seating arrangement is all taken care of, I finished for him. And no one expects gifts. This is Mom and Dad's celebration, remember? Now, why don't you go say hello to everyone while I check on dinner? I walked away before he could respond, feeling his eyes boring into my back. In the kitchen, I took a deep breath and checked the prime rib. It was resting perfectly, its aroma filling the kitchen with promises of the feast to come. I'd spent hours preparing this meal, and for the first time, I allowed myself to feel proud of what I'd accomplished. My phone buzzed with another text from Tyler. We need to talk. Now. I ignored it and continued arranging the appetizer platter. My hands worked steadily, placing prosciutto-wrapped asparagus, goat cheese tartlets, and stuffed mushrooms in a pattern that was both aesthetic and functional. This was what Tyler saw when he looked at me. Capable hands, a useful tool, nothing more. But I knew there was more to me. The research skills that had tracked down Dr. Coleman, the creativity that had planned this evening, the quiet determination that had kept me working toward my degree for 6 years while juggling full-time library work. None of these qualities registered with my brother. In his eyes, I was still just his little sister, Emma, designated family helper. Through the kitchen doorway, I could see into the living room where my mother was laughing at something Dr. Coleman's wife had said. Mom looked beautiful, her silver hair styled elegantly, wearing the blue dress I'd helped her pick out last month. Dad stood nearby, deep in conversation with Dr. Coleman, his face animated in a way I hadn't seen in years. The doorbell rang again. That would be Uncle Frank and Aunt Judith, always precisely on time. I heard my mother exclaim in delight as she opened the door. More voices joined the growing hum of conversation in my living room, the sound of a successful gathering already in progress. Tyler stood at the edge, his phone in his hand, glancing repeatedly toward the kitchen, waiting for me to respond to his summons. This was why I was doing all this. Not for Tyler's approval, not even for my own satisfaction, but for them. Melissa appeared in the kitchen doorway, her expression caught between curiosity and concern. "Need any help?" she offered hesitantly. "Actually, yes," I said, surprising both of us. "Could you take these appetizers out? I need to check on the table settings." She nodded, seemingly relieved to have a task. As Tyler's wife of 7 years, Melissa had always been friendly enough, but she'd quickly adapted to the family dynamic where Tyler made decisions and everyone else followed along. In the dining room, I made final adjustments to the table I'd set with my grandmother's china and the crystal glasses I'd been saving for a special occasion. Each place setting had a small framed photo of my parents from different years of their marriage. At their places at the head of the table, I'd placed the largest frames, containing their wedding photo. "This is exquisite, Emma." I turned to find Diane, my mother's college roommate, admiring the table. In her early 60s, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had spent her career running a successful architectural firm. "Thank you," I said. "I'm hoping it will be a special evening." "It already is," she assured me. "Your mother hasn't stopped talking about how proud she is that you're hosting, though she did mention something about your brother usually taking charge of family events." I arranged a napkin that didn't need arranging. "Tyler has strong opinions about how things should be done." Diane laughed, a knowing sound. "Ah, yes, I have a brother like that. Took me until my 40s to stop letting him run my life." She gave me an appraising look. "You're ahead of schedule." Before I could respond, Dr. Coleman entered the dining room, his tall figure still impressive despite his 80 years. "Miss Lawson," he said, using a formality that felt quaint but somehow respectful. "Your father tells me you've become quite the researcher at Millfield Community College." I felt my cheeks warm. "It's just the local library science program, but yes, I enjoy the work." "Don't diminish your accomplishments," he said firmly. "Your father mentioned your paper on digital archiving was published. That's significant." I blinked in surprise. Dad had noticed? I'd mentioned the publication at Christmas, but the conversation had quickly shifted to Tyler's recent promotion. "Thank you," I managed. "That means a lot." Dr. Coleman nodded. "Your father's very proud, wouldn't stop talking about it when we first arrived." He looked around the room appreciatively. "This is a wonderful thing you've done for your parents, a gathering of the people who've mattered in their lives." From across the room, I caught Tyler watching us, his expression darkening as he observed me in deep conversation with the evening's most prestigious guest. His eyes narrowed slightly, the look he got when one of his carefully laid plans was going awry. I'd seen that expression my whole life. When I decided to study library science instead of business, as he jested, when I bought my house in Millfield instead of renting in the city near him, when I published my paper without asking for his review first. Each of those small acts of independence had been met with the same look, followed by carefully worded advice that was really just criticism disguised as concern. "Are you sure that's the best career path, Emma? Wouldn't you be better off closer to family? If you'd shown me that draft, I could have connected you with people who know about publishing." Tonight, though, there would be no opportunity for him to pull me aside and explain how I could have done things better. Tonight, I was too busy being the center of my own story. Dinner began with my father standing to make a toast to my mother. As everyone raised their glasses, he surprised me by adding, "And to Emma for bringing us all together and creating this beautiful evening." I felt a flush of pleasure as glasses turned in my direction. My mother beamed at me, her eyes bright with tears. The conversation flowed easily as we moved through the courses. I'd planned to eat quickly and get up to serve, but every time I made a motion to rise, someone would ask me a direct question or pull me into the conversation. "Emma, Dr. Coleman was just asking about your research methods for that paper," my father called from the other end of the table. "Oh, well." I found myself explaining my work to an attentive audience, while the dinner I'd prepared was enjoyed exactly as I'd intended, with me present for it. Tyler, seated near the middle of the table, grew increasingly quiet. When he did speak, It was to try to redirect the conversation to topics where he could dominate: the stock market, his recent business trip to Chicago, the expansion of his firm. But tonight, surprisingly, no one seemed particularly interested. "That's nice, Tyler," Aunt Judith said distractedly after one of his anecdotes before turning back to me. "Now, Emma, you were saying about the historical preservation project?" I caught Melissa giving Tyler a sympathetic look as he stabbed at his prime rib with more force than necessary. The evening progressed through each carefully planned course. The wine I'd selected, a Cabernet from a small Willamette Valley vineyard Dad had once mentioned liking, drew compliments from everyone, even Tyler, though he seemed surprised when I explained why I'd chosen it. "You remembered that?" Dad asked, touched. "That was just a passing comment during that trip 3 years ago." "I listen," I said simply, meeting Tyler's eyes briefly across the table. He looked away first. Uncle Frank, usually quiet at family gatherings, found himself engaged in a lively debate with Dr. Coleman about changes in rural healthcare. Diane and Aunt Judith discovered a shared passion for mid-century architecture. Mom kept touching Dad's hand between courses, their faces soft with memories as the conversation wove through the decades of their marriage. And I moved between kitchen and dining room, not as a server, but as a conductor, guiding the evening's rhythm, joining conversations, asking questions that connected one guest to another. Each time I sat down, someone would draw me into the dialogue, keeping me at the table far longer than I'd ever been allowed to remain at previous family gatherings. By the time I brought out the chocolate souffle, my mother's eyes widening with delight, the dynamic of the evening had shifted entirely. I wasn't serving a dinner. I was hosting it. I wasn't invisible. I was central. And I'd done it not by confronting Tyler directly, but by simply claiming my rightful place at my own table. "Emma," my mother said, watching the perfect souffle deflate slightly as I served it, "this is exactly like the one we had in Paris on our 25th. "How did you know?" "You showed me the picture in your album," I said, "and I found the recipe online. Took 3 practice attempts to get it right." The table murmured appreciatively, and I caught the flash of surprise on Tyler's face. He'd always been the thoughtful one, the sibling who supposedly paid attention to details. But tonight was revealing that perhaps he'd been too busy taking credit to notice who was really paying attention all these years. As everyone exclaimed over the dessert, Tyler pushed his chair back abruptly. "I need some air," he muttered, heading for the back porch. I hesitated only briefly before following him. The evening air was cool after the warmth of the dining room. Tyler stood at the railing, looking out at my small backyard where I'd strung lights in the maple tree for the occasion. "You've made your point," he said without turning around. "What point would that be?" I asked, moving to stand beside him. "That you can take over. That you can push me out." I sighed. "That wasn't my intention, Tyler." "Then what was?" He finally looked at me, and I was surprised to see genuine confusion in his expression. "Why change everything at the last minute? Why invite all these people without telling me?" "Because it wasn't your event to control," I said quietly. "It's my house. I'm hosting. I made the decisions." "But we always—" "You always decide," I corrected. "For as long as I can remember. And I always go along with it. Not this time." He was silent for a long moment. "I didn't realize you felt that way." "I know you didn't. Why would you? I never said anything." Tyler leaned against the railing, his shoulders slumping slightly. "You know, when we were kids, after Dad started his practice and was never home, Mom was always so busy with her volunteer work. I felt like I had to step up, take charge, make sure everything went smoothly." "I remember," I said quietly. It was true. Tyler, 4 years older, had been the one to make sure I got to school on time, to help with homework when our parents were too busy. "But we're not kids anymore, Tyler. I'm 32, not 12. He nodded slowly. "Force of habit, I guess. It's hard to see you differently." "Try harder," I said, but without heat. "Because I am different. I'm not the little girl who needed your protection or guidance anymore." Tyler studied me with new eyes. "No, you're not. You've built a life here that I didn't even really know about. Your research, your connections at the college, that Dr. Coleman seems to think you're pretty impressive." "I am impressive," I said, the words feeling foreign but right on my tongue. "Maybe not in the same ways you are, but in my own ways." Inside, I could hear laughter as Dr. Coleman apparently finished telling a story. The sound drifted out to us, a reminder of the celebration continuing without our presence. They seem to be having a good time, Tyler admitted grudgingly. They are, I agreed. That's what matters, isn't it? Not who planned it or who gets the credit. Tyler ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I remembered from our childhood, something he did when he was trying to figure something out. I always thought I was helping you, taking the pressure off. By telling me I couldn't sit at my own dinner table, he at least had the grace to look embarrassed. I shouldn't have said that. No, you shouldn't have. I let the words hang between us for a moment before continuing. Tyler, I don't need you to manage my life or make my decisions. What I need is for you to see me as an equal, as someone capable of having good ideas and taking the lead sometimes. Like tonight, he said slowly, with Dr. Coleman. Dad hasn't looked that happy in years, I nodded. Because I thought about what would truly make him happy, not what would be most impressive or convenient. The back door opened, and Melissa peered out. Everything okay? Your mom's asking for both of you. They want to cut the anniversary cake. We'll be right in, I told her with a smile. When she'd gone, Tyler turned to me with a strange expression. There's cake too? Of course there's cake. It's an anniversary. He shook his head, a reluctant smile forming. You really did think of everything. I did. I guess I underestimated you. You've been doing that our entire lives, I said, but without bitterness. Tyler looked at me for a long moment, as if truly seeing me for the first time. I'm sorry, Emma. I know. I reached for the door handle. Now come inside. This night isn't about you or me. It's about Mom and Dad and their 40 years together. You're right, he straightened his shoulders. Lead the way. And I did. Inside, the atmosphere had grown warm and celebratory. Someone, Aunt Judith, I suspected, had poured champagne for everyone. As we re-entered, Dad stood up, glass in hand. Before we have cake, I'd like to say something, he announced. The table quieted, faces turning toward him expectantly. Margaret, he said, looking at my mother with such tenderness it made my throat tight. 40 years ago, you took a chance on a nervous medical student with nothing to offer but big dreams and a bigger heart. Every good thing in my life came from that decision of yours. Mom wiped at her eyes, smiling up at him. But of all the gifts we've given each other, Dad continued, our children are the greatest. He looked at Tyler and me, his expression proud. Tyler, you've always been our rock. Strong, dependable, a natural leader. Tyler nodded, accepting the familiar praise graciously. And Emma, Dad's voice softened, you've been our heart. The one who remembers birthdays and anniversaries, who listens to the stories we tell over and over, who keeps our family connected. I blinked rapidly, surprised by the specificity of his words. He saw me. He really saw me. Tonight, Dad raised his glass higher, is a perfect example of who you are, Emma. You've gathered the people who matter most to us, created this beautiful celebration, and given us memories we'll cherish forever. Your mother and I couldn't be prouder of the woman you've become. I felt tears threatening. Tyler reached over and squeezed my shoulder briefly, a gesture of support that was new between us. To 40 years, Dad concluded, and to family, old friends, and new beginnings. To 40 years, everyone echoed, raising their glasses. After the last guest had left and my parents had gone up to the guest room, I stood in my kitchen, surveying the aftermath of the evening. The dinner plates were stacked neatly, wine glasses clustered on the counter, serving platters emptied of all but a few crumbs, evidence of a night well spent. In years past, I would have been left alone to deal with this chaos, expected to have everything spotless by morning without anyone noticing the effort involved. Tonight had been different. Diane had insisted on helping clear the table, using the time to tell me more about the preservation project. We need someone with your skills, she'd said, sliding a business card next to my fruit bowl. Call me when you're ready. Dr. Coleman's wife had organized the leftovers with military precision, labeling containers and stacking them in my refrigerator while discussing the possibility of me guest lecturing in his former department's research methodology course. Even Aunt Judith, who typically fluttered around uselessly at cleanups, had rolled up her sleeves and tackled a pile of serving utensils, all while suggesting I join her book club since we need more academic perspectives. But most surprising had been Tyler, who had stepped into the kitchen without being asked, rolled up his sleeves, and washed Crystal without complaint. He'd worked silently beside me, a new thoughtfulness in his movements. My phone buzzed with a text. I expected it to be from one of the guests who just left, perhaps thanking me for the evening. Instead, it was from Tyler. "You were right. I've been overbearing. You did an amazing job tonight. I'm proud to be your brother." I smiled at the screen, then set the phone down to finish loading the dishwasher. From upstairs, I could hear the murmur of my parents' voices, the occasional soft laugh. Dr. Coleman's card sat on my counter. He'd written his email address on the back, along with a note, "Your research interests me. Let's continue the conversation." Diane had made a similar overture, mentioning an architectural preservation project that could use my library science expertise. In one evening, my world had expanded beyond the narrow confines of family expectation, not because I'd made a scene or demanded recognition, but because I'd quietly refused to accept the role that had been assigned to me. As I wiped down the counters, I glanced at my reflection in the darkened window. Same face, same person I'd always been, but something fundamental had shifted. I hadn't needed to explain myself or justify my worth. I'd simply claimed my space and let my actions speak. I thought about Monday morning, how I'd returned to the college library where I'd been quietly building a career that most of my family had barely acknowledged. But Dr. Coleman had noticed. Diane had noticed. And now, perhaps, Tyler had begun to notice too. The thought of future family gatherings, holidays, birthdays, the anniversary dinners to come, the 45th, the 50th, brought a smile to my face rather than the usual nod of anxiety. They would be different now. I would be different. Not just the hands that served, but a voice that was heard. Not just a presence in the background, but a person at the center of her own life. I checked the kitchen one last time. Everything was in order, ready for morning. The way I'd always left it, but the similarity ended there. The quiet sense of invisibility that had followed me through these familiar motions for years was gone, replaced by something steadier, more substantial. From upstairs came the soft murmur of my parents' voices, still talking, still celebrating. The house felt different with them in it, warm in a way that went beyond temperature. I'd created this moment for them, but in doing so, I'd created something important for myself as well. I turned off the kitchen light and headed upstairs, leaving behind the remnants of the old pattern and walking confidently towards something new. Tomorrow would be different. I would be seen. And more importantly, I would see myself.